Quick, go along. Find one for yourself, a sweetly rotting bed to lie upon.
Thou art a dragon? Or perhaps a crow?
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman, and today we're going to be talking about the crow people of the Souls universe. Yeah, I know crows or ravens are a bit of a recurring thing, especially in FromSoft games, but we're mainly going to stick to the topic of crow people or crow-like humanoids in this video. So without further ado, let's begin with the crow demons of the painted world of Ariamis. Now, according to one of the lead artistic designers of Dark Souls 1, Hiroshi Nakamura, he envisioned the crow demons as originally being humans who wanted to fly so badly that they sprouted wings, but rather than their skeletons evolving over time, they instead twisted their limbs into these unnatural positions, contorting their bodies into what appears to be a bird-like shape. That's how he always imagined them. And Miyazaki himself said he designed them as worshippers of the crow goddess Velka, whose bodies had been warped by their devotion to their, eldritch god. And so combining those two descriptions, it seems like the crow demons are, worshippers of the goddess of sin, Velka, whose faith in her was so devout and strong that they too wanted to become crows. But a human can't really just become a crow. I mean, I guess they can, we'll get to that later. But that's why they look so fucked up. And they pretty much only inhabit the painted world, which is a place where things go to escape, essentially like the island of broken toys, or, something to that effect. And according to Miyazaki, the birdmen were no different. Now, if I had to put my own little theory into the equation as to how the crowmen got there, we do find that pardoner's set down in the well of the painted world. And the pardoner's were essentially priests of Velka who were sent across the lands to offer people absolution, to absolve their sins. And I guess it's not too hard to believe that one of these confessors could have led a group of Velka's devout somewhere that he thought that they'd be safe in this, crumbling world that is Dark Souls 1. Now, the fact that we find his set down a well is kind of questionable. Perhaps he was killed. When the painting started to rot, we see early signs of it even in Dark Souls 1, of that particular cycle's painting is just beginning to show the signs of it. It sort of reminds me of in Elden Ring we had the famous Carian knight Loretta leading all the Albinaurics, or the homunculus, to a promised land of sorts where she thought that they'd be safe. I guess in that retrospect, the consecrated snowfield and the Haligtree are a lot like the painted world. Anyway, though, it's really tough to say why that pardoner set is down there. Miyazaki himself said that basically he had a bunch of extra concept art and designs that he wanted to use, but they didn't fit anywhere else, so he created the painted world. And he himself designed the crow demons as worshippers of Velka, so he probably just threw it in there because the painted world has this association with Velka. Now, the crow demons themselves, they don't really do much. They just hang around the perches of the painted world and watch. Now, the crow demons pretty much just act like regular crows. They'll attack you if you get close. But other than that, they just sit along the perches hanging out with actual crows. Which to me, I feel like is a credit to Nakamura's vision that they're just people who really wanted to be crows or really wanted to fly. We don't actually see them do much flying, but they do a lot of other bird-like things. I do like the idea that the fact that Miyazaki had nowhere else to put any of this stuff sort of became a part of the painted world's residents' lore. It's full of all these beings and people that didn't quite fit in anywhere else. And that's the exact reason they were put here in the first place. Now, back to the crow demons. They don't quite appear to be fully bird-brained, even if their behavior doesn't make the greatest case for them. Although we do learn from the wandering crow demon in Dark Souls 2 that they can speak. And not only that, some can master the refined art of soul transposition. Weaponsmith Ornifex is very mysterious. She claims to have been a blacksmith to the gods, essentially. Her house is filled with these dolls, indicating that perhaps she's trying to get back to the painted world, or perhaps find other lost souls and give them a way of accessing it. It's really tough to say. But in a way, you could make the argument that the crow demons might have felt abandoned by their goddess Velka, and that's why they found a new safe home in the painted world. That could also be why they tossed the confessor down the well, and perhaps these crow demons replaced their worship of Velka with a new worship of Priscilla, the half-dragon, half-god guardian of the painted world. Seems pretty reasonable to me. And that, I believe, brings us to the next step in what I believe to be the crow person's evolutionary chain. So as we know, many cycles have passed between Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, so naturally the crow beings would look a little bit different. They're now known as the Corvians, and there's a few different subtypes of them. Now the first type most people will encounter is on the Road of Sacrifices, and they're the Storytellers and the Forlorn. The Storytellers presumably come from the new painted world of Ariandel, and appear to be doing the same thing I believed Ornifex to be doing back in Dark Souls 2, seeking out other forlorn beings and giving them a means to find the painted world. In this case, though, the Storytellers just tell the stories of the painted world and its white-haired, barefoot, scythe-wielding protector that guarded the painted world for as long as anyone could remember. And I know most people are thinking, oh, they must be spreading the word of Priscilla, but they're actually spreading the word of its new protector, the enigmatic Sister Fried, who has effectively mantled Priscilla and taken her place as the new guardian of the painted world. More on that later. The Storytellers wield these poison staffs that house these mysterious parasitic spores, and to me that just hints at the rotted nature of the painting in this cycle, and the fact that they serve Fried, who has chosen rot over fire. Anyway, though, the beings that are listening to these stories are referred to as the Forlorn. Not necessarily the same Forlorn from Dark Souls 2, although it is possible that some of them did become these Forlorn. Now these guys basically look like feathered hollows, and they're generally regarded by their own item descriptions as timid and pathetic creatures. However, when cornered, they're finally able to sprout the wings of a crow in a rather violent transformation. Afterwards, they go into a frenzied-like state where they don't stop attacking until you kill them. These miserable bastards come in two variants. One tends to favor a great knife of, in my opinion, a pretty cool design, but the description of this knife openly mocks the Corvians' use of it as nothing more than a transparent attempt to intimidate their foes. The other variant wields a scythe in honor of the great protector of the painted world, or I guess rather the long line of scythe-wielding protectors that the painted world has had. Now those were the only Corvians we encountered in the base game, but when Ashes of Ariandel dropped, we got some new versions. These sort of look like the natural descendants of the crow demons, although they look a bit more bug-like in nature, but that's probably due to the rotted state of the painting. And I suppose now would be as good a time as any to explain what exactly is happening within the painting. So at some point prior to the events of Dark Souls 3, the unkindled former sister of the Sable Church of Londor found herself in the painted world, and once there she learned of its legendary protector. Now whether this cycle had one of those is sort of unclear. I like to believe the painter was Priscilla's descendant and that there was no true protector of this cycle's painting, but it's just as likely that if there was, Fried killed them. Based on a particular item of interest found in the boss room of Ariandel and Fried, namely these mummified remains, I think it's safe to say that Fried wasn't the first to come into the painted world and take up the mantle of a Priscilla-like figure. See, at first I thought these remains were Priscilla, based on the big old tail that it has, but upon closer inspection the tail is in fact a fake. And I can imagine that these remains probably belong to the most recent protector of the painted world before Fried. Shit, maybe even seeing the fake tail is what gave her the idea in the first place. Now, Fried noticed this lack of a leader, this lack of a godlike being for the followers of the painted world to worship, and she effectively filled this void. She got herself a scythe just like Priscilla, had white hair just like her, and it's probably also why she walked around barefoot. This was a symbol that the beings of the painting could recognize and had almost an inborn reverence for. And I imagine she enjoyed her time as a leader, being worshipped and, protecting the painting. Her only real mistakes came when it began to rot. To say she's mishandled that would be an understatement. So when the first signs began to show that it was time to start burning the painting away, Fried and Father Ariandel, who himself might just be a crowified adjudicator giant, some claim that he's possibly Velka's brother, but personally I don't think that's the case. I think he's just a giant who had no purpose in the world and found his way to the painting and over time became more crow-like, similar to my theories regarding to the Forlorn of Dark Souls 2. But anyway though, these two made an extremely short-sighted decision. They chose not to burn the painting, but to smother this flame that was going to burn the painting whether they wanted to or not, with Ariandel's blood. This would keep the painting from burning away, but it did nothing to stop the rot. Now by the time we show up, we see what's become of the Corvians who did not choose to embrace the rot and follow the new world order that Fried had established. And let's just say they look a lot worse off than their feathery hollow cousins. So we know from the man-eater flies that the rot of the painting has a transformative effect on its denizens. The flies themselves used to be men, and the Corvians of the painting look to be turning into bugs themselves, at least judging by their eyes. In fact, most of the Corvians in the painted world are so rotted out that Fried established an order of Corvian knights to basically cull them. The Corvian knights are some of the deadliest enemies in the game, at least for me. They're covered head to toe with this pitch black crow-like armor and wield unique weapons called the crow quills, which is like a paired rapier and these like throwing knife claw thing. Now I'll give them this, they have a pretty fucking cool design. I've always been a fan of the beaked Plague Doctor style helmet, and they're occasionally known to sport cloaks as well. Now they're still technically Corvians, but they exhibit a lot more bat-like tendencies such as hanging upside down, and I guess that's probably the only bat quality they have. But their armor is quite interesting as well. It's clearly reminiscent of Dark Wraith armor, which of course makes sense given Sister Fried's pedigree, if you will, as being one of the founding members of the Sable Church of the infamous Land of Hollows known as Londor. And this is the same sort of visual cue reference thing I think is going on with the Forlorn and Storyteller Corvians, as they appear to be both hollow and crow, which sort of represents the current painted world as a whole. These Corvians are also noticeably larger than most of the residents of the settlement, although there are a few of the rotted variants that are close in height. Now, it is tough to say why exactly some of the Corvians are rotting out and others aren't, but I think the ones that have accepted Fried's New World Order are the feathered ones and the knights. That's why we see a bunch of the feathered hollow style forlorn Corvians right outside the church that Fried's living in. So it appears that that's likely where the schism in the Corvian race happened, as all the ones who argued for the burning of the painting are the rotted away residents of the Corvian settlement. We know from Chef Corvian that these guys believed that burning away the flame when it begins to rot was the one thing they did right. As he says, not like those fools on the outside. These Corvians were at the very least strong in their convictions that they were willing to bugify and rot out as opposed to joining her new doctrine for the painting. And I think that factored into Fried's decision to have her knights kill off these residents more so than to just stave off the rot. I mean, she showed up and peacefully took over this land, and most of its native residents and the newcomers accepted her as its leader until she turned into what many would refer to as a tyrant who thought she knew what was best for this land rather than a large portion of its native residents, and they effectively became dissidents that Fried would have to kill off. Although I can't say why the storytellers and all the other Corvians that did follow her believed her. As we all know from the FromSoft games as a whole, stagnation is not sustainable. I mean, look at the giant crypt underneath her chapel. It's filled with the dead and rotting away corpses and the man-eater flies. That's not going to just magically go away one day. But I realize now I'm getting a bit off topic from the Corvians themselves. The Corvians of the settlement come in a few different rotting shapes and sizes, but they generally always tend to carry this what appears to be a rotted sack, or maybe it's a tail of some kind. Maybe it's one of those mysterious parasites that the storyteller's staff talks about, but they drag this around and sometimes it gets all tangled up and they're unable to even walk around straight, or rather crawl with the bigger ones. And speaking of the bigger ones, they're capable of vomiting out a poison-like substance, which is probably again the same poison that comes from those parasites in the storyteller's staffs. So it appears that all these poor bastards are filled with these mysterious parasites that only showed up in the painted world because of Fried's refusal to burn away the painting and start anew. I mean, she even had an added layer of insurance by imprisoning the painter, so that even if these Corvians did manage to find a champion who could help them out, they wouldn't be able to paint a new painting until they were able to find that painter. Little did Fried know that the painter had a specific mentor named Gale, who would go on what many would refer to as an odyssey to find the painter a pigment for her new painting, which, with any luck, would never have to succumb to the rot because, you know, the pigment, the dark soul, had never been used to paint any of these paintings. Now, I don't really know if the new painting that's painted with the dark soul at the end of the DLC will or won't rot, but I like to think that it won't. I mean, like I said, they had never painted one with the Dark Soul, at least as far as we know, so who's to say what would happen to that painting? But at the risk of going off topic for even longer, I believe that's all I had to say about the Corvians and the Crow Demons. As always, if I missed anything, please let me know in the comments, because things always seem to slip my mind, or there's a bunch of stuff that I tend to miss at times. But yeah, I hope you guys found the video to be at least somewhat informative or amusing. As always, if you liked the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me rant about random lore topics and occasionally TV shows, please consider subscribing. We just cracked 20K, which is a pretty big deal for me. That's way more than I ever thought I would see. Thank you guys. I really can't thank you guys enough. So anything I say will be kind of corny, but let's get to our outro and then some final thoughts, shall we? I probably should have fit this back into the main video, but I always thought it was funny how Fried just kind of tosses old Wilhelm's body down into the crypt to be eaten by the man-eating flies after he fails her. Really shows how she values her loyal subjects, doesn't it? I mean, sure, it could just be to cover up his death. I mean, maybe the Corvian devout would start asking questions, and if they have to say that Wilhelm died, well, it doesn't exactly instill faith in Fried's regime. Her most loyal supporter failing her and dying, probably not something that she would want her other followers to know about. Anyways, though, I got a couple great videos planned. I mean, I have a lot of things that are in varying stages of development, and I know I always say that, but I think the next video will probably be about the mysterious East from the Dark Souls trilogy, Elden Ring, and Bloodborne. Then I want to finally finish my Oblivion drug trade video. And as always, there's a lot of cool FromSoft stuff coming, and eventually the Fallout stuff. I know I keep saying that. But without further ado, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you guys have a good one, and I will see you next time. See ya.
When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside.